And at the end of the day, what's so rewarding about healthcare is when we get it done. Look, if I save corporate America, a bunch of money, it's great. It's rewarding. Everybody makes more money. It's wonderful. We save a health system money. They provide better care in their community, and they don't have to cut costs by reducing people, which directly affects patient care.
Without supplies, there's no surgery. Without products, there's no patient care. Welcome to Power Supply, the healthcare supply chain podcast focused on helping you navigate the intricacies of logistics, purchasing, contracting, and supplier relationships. Each episode, we speak with healthcare executives, supply chain leaders, and innovative entrepreneurs from across the country as they share their stories, experience, and expertise on the industry we love. From the loading dock to strategic sourcing, from buyers to the C-suite and across the enterprise, we tackle the real-life issues impacting the healthcare supply chain. Whether you're tuning in for conversation or inspiration, we're glad you're here. You're just in time to hear it from the source and stock up on insight. So sit back and plug into Power Supply.
Today on Power Supply, we will talk with David Pennino, founder and CEO at LogicSource, about non-clinical spend. We have had many episodes focused on this purchase services and even broader indirect spend category, and there's a reason for it. It is becoming a very popular area with a lot of attention nationally in a lot of different ways. Strategically, how can we get a handle on costs in this area? It's a big percentage of the hospital spend. And David's going to give us some benchmarks today, Hayes.
He absolutely is. It's a hot topic, just like Power Supply is. So come enjoy today. You're going to have a great time and learn a lot. So come on and join us today.
Yeah, this is a fun one. We'll be right back with David Pennino.
I'm Hayes Walder.
This is Gary Skinner.
And I'm Justin Poulin.
From the studios of Healthcare HQ, you're listening to Power Supply.
We are speaking with David Pennino, founder and CEO at LogicSource. We're going to be talking about, well, really, how can we benchmark non-clinical spend in the healthcare supply chain and really bring ourselves in line with other industries? Because something's not adding up here, David, and I know that's probably going to be a little bit of your story and why you founded LogicSource today, but I want to welcome you to the podcast. Thanks so much for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate the time.
So why don't you talk about your background? Because I understand that your experience in non-clinical expenses is very much outside of the healthcare industry initially, at least.
Yeah. So look, background on me quickly. I grew up professionally at Gartner, largest IT services firm in the world. And a lot of what we've built here at LogicSource was kind of created by a foundation of growing up in a firm like that. What Gartner had was, everybody in the world told them what they were buying from a technology perspective, how much they were paying for it, why they were buying it. The brilliance of that business is people called them and told them what they were doing it, and they repackaged it and sold it as research. And it was an incredibly powerful business that moved markets. If they told somebody that IBM's new tech wasn't good, nobody bought it. And, growing up there and learning about that business, I thought, boy, where could I build a large, professional services firm like Gartner did? And I thought, simply put, buying stuff jumped off the page at me. The procurement world is underfunded. It's not where top talent goes historically. When you think about high potential employees, and again, there's exceptions, don't get me wrong, but it's not where high posts go. And economies of scale around buying things make a huge difference. And so we set out to do this with Bain Capital back in 2009. Fast forward to today, we have $100 billion worth of spend data going through the firm. And, we run 40 plus procurement departments and advise another, I don't know how many, 40, 50. And we've taken that Gartner model of knowing what everybody buys, how much they pay for it, why they buy it, but we've added to that we actually buy. So we have spend leverage and we have spend data, making it a really powerful combination to be able to help folks not only benchmark where they are against market, but then go get below market pricing and, high quality service and price.
David, let me just jump in there and ask one quick question about your other businesses outside of healthcare. What other verticals are you guys in?
Yeah, great question. So I started, just context, by the way, I started the business in marketing, and the thesis was marketeers are very fickle creatures. I'm one of them. We're emotional. And if you can convince a marketer that you can help them make their budgets go further and you can help them save money, it gets easier in theory when you get into IT and facilities and design and construction, distribution, logistics, et cetera. And so we started in marketing, and the largest consumer of marketing are consumer-facing businesses like retail, consumer packaged goods, et cetera. So my portfolio over the last decade has been world-class brands like Lululemon, Tractor Supply, Gap, Bath & Body Works, Titleist, Mars Corporation, et cetera. Companies that sell products and services through the internet or in physical space to consumers because they buy a bunch of marketing. But marketing, as we got great at that, brought us into the store because marketers also bought things like signage, end caps, and fixtures. That got us into facilities, which then got us into distribution logistics, so on and so forth. So fast forward to today, we have a healthcare business, we have a private equity business, we have a retail business, we have a consumer packaged goods business. We have clients in publishing, financial services, et cetera. What they all have in common is they service consumers. So they all buy similar stuff.
So why get into healthcare? I mean, it's a complex area to navigate. It's not like other industries. I guess my real question is, when you moved into healthcare, did you all of a sudden, maybe a couple of years into it, go, wait a second, we thought it was going to be easier than this?
Yeah, if you'll allow me to tell you a quick story. So I got into healthcare during COVID, actually. So my neighbor during COVID, I live in Charleston, South Carolina, and my neighbor during COVID was the newly appointed CEO of Roper St. Francis Hospital down here. And he had gotten really sick right when he accepted the job. And he convalesced basically in his home, which Charleston, the houses are about 12 feet apart. So his family and my family were like a compound during COVID, and he wasn't able to work because he was getting healthy from an illness he had gone through. And he would basically bug me. My office was on my front porch, basically, against my front porch. And he would sit in the rocking chairs and make my dog bark during Zoom meetings because he thought it was funny. And he'd basically bug me. And at the end of every day, we'd have a beer together and he'd say, "What the heck do you do?" And I started telling him what we do. And he was like, "Boy, why don't you do that for health systems?" And I never thought of it. And we had a couple of hypotheses. Again, this is like a COVID beer on the porch. And he said, well, out of curiosity, how much of Lululemon, for example, how much do they spend as a corollary to revenue on the stuff you buy? Goods not for resale is what they call it in retail. They call it non-med surge or purchase services in healthcare. They call it goods not for resale or GNFR in retail. And I said, well, it's about 20% of revenue. Then he said, interesting. Let's go see if it's 20% of revenue in health system. He said, what else? And I said, well, the categories are things like marketing and IT and facilities and design and construction, distribution, logistics. He said, okay, well, let's go see if they buy those same things. Long story short, he called about 10 of his buddies who were CFOs and CEOs of health systems, convinced them to send us their AP data. And what we found was it was 20% or higher in health systems in terms of what they spent on purchase services or non-med surge, procurement. So the math held. The categories, with the exception of packaging, health systems don't package anything. With the exception of that category, they buy all the same stuff. And it dawned on me when I was sitting with him one day, we live in South Carolina, we were watching a Gamecocks game, and there was a MUSC commercial for their orthopedic practice, on the SEC network at 7:30. Well, there was also an Under Armour commercial. So it doesn't really matter what you're selling. You're buying 30 seconds on the SEC network to market your product. And the overlap was incredible. And so he told me, I'll leave you with this. He told me, though, he said, when you go do this, understand it's going to be a brutal sales cycle. We as an industry are incredibly slow, but it'll be a life sentence if you get in. And so far, everything he has said has come true.
I like how he called it a life sentence. Yeah.
Life sentence.
I like it. I liked everything except the whole South Carolina Gamecocks thing. You were going great until that's part of the story.
Well, what are you going to do? I mean, we're not that good. Be nice to us.
I've been there.
I just love the fact of the 2 degrees of separation on the conversation, how these things start, these think tanks start. You having a rocking chair, COVID beer on the back porch during a Zoom call, interrupting your calls with the dog barking, think it's funny, and then look where you're at now. That's just crazy. That's just how things happen.
Yeah, my dad always said 90% of life is just showing up, and I do my best to always show up.
Well said, David.
You got to show up to the right places too. Let's agree to that. So when you got in, okay, let's dig a little bit deeper, because this is the beginning of the story, but there's a lot more to the story, right? So you kind of get into this, non-clinical spend, and you're starting to realize, like, okay, it's 20% or more, so it might even be a bigger opportunity than what we already have, what we already know about. So now you're kind of salivating. You're not quite yet understanding what he means by life sentence, but he said it's a long sales cycle. And, you're starting to dive in, and you're wondering, who do we have to talk to at the hospital? Like, how do we show them how we can help them, right? So what did you find as you started navigating that? Who were you talking to? What did you see them doing differently in this space than other industries that stuck out to you like a sore thumb?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say that the closest analogy I've found, believe it or not, in the health system space is CPG, because supply chain is a powerful title in CPG. It's not a title that really exists in banking, retail, et cetera. You'd have a chief merchant in a retailer that would be considered, I think, your supply chain head. But the supply chain person in the health system is quite powerful. And frankly, they want to buy the, physician preference stuff. They want to focus on the medical side of things. Buying, elevator maintenance and snow removal and security guards is not really what they want to do. Having said that, just like the other industries we face, you have to get above procurement. And for the procurement people listening, I'm not coming at you, but it's a simple question. Can you tell a marketeer what to do? You can't. Can you tell a CIO they can't buy that piece of software? No, you cannot. So you need the CFO, the COO, or the CAO, and in some instances the CEO, to get engaged. So by the way, that's the exact same thing in the other industries I face. And my neighbor and friend and I fought over this, because he said, no, I think we're different. You can get to the supply chain person and they can get this done. And I would tell you, lifetime, 15 years of doing this at LogicSource and my whole career doing this, lifetime batting average, he's not wrong. I'm batting about 150 when I meet a procurement head. I'm batting about 730 when I meet a CFO. And I'm batting darn close to 1,000 when I meet a CEO. I just don't meet a lot of them in the context of outsourcing procurement or becoming a service provider for procurement.
What do you think is the reason for that? Like, because, you look at on the clinical side, the clinical spend, you don't necessarily need to get that high, right? Like, as you mentioned, the supply chain has got a lot of control and influence over that. And I have some theories on why that makes sense, because to me, if you're going to get into healthcare, you're not exactly in supply chain on the top of the wage scale for supply chain professionals, right? And so if you get into healthcare, you're getting in because, you've got a passion for delivering the care, right? And there's something like super interesting about dealing with cutting edge medical devices and dealing with all of that, right? And you have more support structures in place to be successful, so you don't have to feel like you're going to do it all on your own. But then when you get into this non-clinical spend area, I feel like that's where you start to run into, just some of the, I don't want to say it's cultural, but it's almost structural. It's almost foundational, but it is got a cultural piece to it. Is that why you have to go to the C-level to get things done in this non-clinical area? Or does it have more to do with experience and sophistication and focus? Because, maybe people get recruited into supply chain, they spend a little time in this, but as they grow within their own organizations, they're moving over to clinical spend as part of their career growth. I've seen a few different reasons for this, but I want to hear what your observations are about why do you have to get to the CEO?
I think there's a lot. When you pan back, right, the raw number of categories you're talking about. So just think about a multi-hospital system, and you think about everything they have to buy. You're actually talking about thousands of categories. And your average purchase services procurement team, if there is one, is incredibly small. Institute of Supply Chain Management would tell you that you should have about 1.2% investment as a corollary to spend under management. So your procurement team should be about 1.2% of spend under management. For everybody listening that's a hospital system, CPO, or head of supply chain, call me if you're anywhere near that number. I'll buy a dinner at your favorite restaurant. I don't care what country it's in. You're nowhere near that number. You're underfunded. So what happened? What does that mean? That means that marketers, IT folks, construction folks are doing procurement off the corner of their desk at night on weekends. So that makes this a harder challenge, to answer your question, right? So because you have this distributed buying environment, it's very hard to get your arms around it and create impact, which means you need a COO, a CAO, a CFO to say, hey, everybody, let's come together. Today's a great example. One of the top children's hospitals in my opinion, the world, we met with today in a final readout for our assessment. Their CFO brought the entire executive leadership team in the room and said, look, here's the analysis we've done. Here's the savings we think we could drive. Do all of you buy in that we're going to go do this? Because if they're sitting there with their arms folded saying, you're not going to touch my suppliers, this is going to fail. And a procurement leader can't pull that off. They don't have enough power to get all those people in the room and say, speak now or forever hold your peace. We're doing this. The other thing the procurement leader can't do is they can't make those trade-offs. Let's say for fun, I can take 12% out of the marketing budget. The CFO can say, hey, CMO, go respend it. Market deeper. Help us grow, or drop it to the bottom line. A procurement person can't make that decision, right? The CFO can. So you really need executive sponsorship. And I don't think it matters what industry you're in. You need executive sponsorship for procurement initiatives.
I was going to ask you, David, obviously you're in other industries other than healthcare, but that holds true. You like to have that additional higher end, part of the sales process.
Yes, sir. You have to have the CFO, the COO engaged in these programs, or you're just going to spin.
It's interesting. So the first benchmark that you gave us, is this 1.5% of spend that, nobody in healthcare is doing. Are there other benchmarks like that? Are they all related to how many resources are committed to these, initiatives in supply chain that are way off versus other industries? Because there's a lot of similarities, like you still need an executive sponsor in the other industries. So that's not unique. It's just how do you structure it as a supply chain team to ensure you get that adoption from the C-level? How do you build credibility to bring these opportunities to them, right? Or how do you find a partner who can do it for you? But regardless, are there other benchmarks that are in other industries where healthcare is way off, like that one on how much they invest in procurement?
There's a ton. I mean, take contracts, for example. You should have, 80+% of your spend on contracts. But when it comes to the 80-20 rule of your largest expenditures need to be on contracts, I'm finding, that they're running 20 to 30% below corporate America in having contracts at all. That doesn't mean good contracts, but do you have a contract you can actually touch and find that says what this supplier is doing for you, how much you're paying for it? That's a big issue. A publicly traded company has an audit they have to go through, and it would be a material weakness if they didn't have their largest suppliers on contracts. We're seeing it a little bit harder to get health system paper. Now, we also do contract maturity assessments to see if they're actually good contracts. That's a different issue. But is your spend contracted? Number of suppliers that you're supporting. We see a huge tail of suppliers and a corollary to spend under management. So some of these systems, if you look at the statistic, they should have, 3,000 suppliers for their $1 billion in spend under management, and they have like 16,000 suppliers. And that's because they don't have a centralized procurement policy, a centralized procurement team. So anybody can buy from anybody they want. Things like that we see. GPOs, another great example. So on average, I've looked at probably 25, 30 health system AP feeds, accounts payable feeds. The lowest I've seen is 12% of purchased services or non-med surge procurement is going through a GPO. The highest I've seen is 26%. Now, that doesn't mean it was bought well. It just means it's on a GPO contract. So let's just round up and say they all spend 26% of their spend is covered by GPOs. That means roughly 75%, I rounded up 1 point, 74% isn't managed by a GPO at all. I'd advocate it's higher than that. But let's say it's 74%. These health systems are so married to their GPOs that they think that, hey, I've already got a GPO, I'm covered. No, you're not. 74% of your spend isn't covered by that GPO, let alone the other 25% that might not be covered well. But even if you love them and they hung the moon, cool, don't touch it. There's 75% of your spend we can go get. And by the way, GPOs exist in grocery, in retail, in hospitality. But for some reason, they have this unnatural hold on health system executives.
How are GPOs leveraged in the other industries?
Exact same way. But they don't, it's like we all pay taxes, at least you should, or, your door might get knocked down any minute now. It's like when you get a tax return and you feel great about it. That just means the government had your money all year and they gave it back to you without interest. These GPOs pay a rebate back at the end of the year and everybody's counting on it. That's your money. And I don't see that in corporate America. Corporate America doesn't invest in the GPO the way health systems do. And they don't look for that rebate check. They look at that as, hey, you've kept my money all year. And I want interest on my money if you're going to keep my money all year. So they all use them the exact same way, commodity sourcing. GPOs are brilliant for commodities. They're a tool in a multi-tooled approach. And think about the military without the Navy or without the Army or without any of the branches. If you only have one branch, you're not going to be as powerful. GPO is one tool in a multifaceted set of tools to attack non-med surge procurement.
But David, part of this, you just described that many of the healthcare systems are understaffed. But doesn't that lend to their leaning on the GPO so much more than they perhaps should? They just don't have enough resources in order to go out and do some of these things. Agreed?
100% agree. And these folks have carte blanche access to the hallways of these institutions. One of the biggest, Sycamore private equity, one of the biggest private equity firms in the country, when they buy a company, one of the first things they do is they cancel all contractor badges and make them reapply. And it's incredible when they do it because basically these companies have access to these buildings and just walk around and sell stuff to their companies. So one of the first things they do is just cancel the visitor badges and make them reapply. And it's amazing how their professional services spend goes down materially within the first 3 months of them owning a company.
David, I got to have a carve-out call with you about that.
All day long. I was thinking the same thing, Justin.
You just brought something to me I haven't thought about before, and that's really genius.
It was. I was at Staples Corporation right after Sycamore bought them, and I was visiting with an executive there, and I'm like, "Hey, what's up with the visitor parking lot?" And if you've ever been to Staples, they have this massive headquarters and this massive visitor parking lot, and they said, "Oh, we canceled all of our badges and made everybody reapply." A week ago, that would have been all Mercedes and BMWs. It was empty because none of the professional services firms could walk the halls and sell work.
Mm-hmm.
But, the GPOs have carte blanche access to these systems.
So interesting.
It is. That's a great perspective on it.
Yeah.
I love it.
So your neighbor said it's a sales cycle that's going to be pretty brutal. Maybe you could comment on, I think you termed it when we connected ahead of time, speed of execution. Could you comment on that too? Because, it seems like the environment today is one that really can't suffer slow moving adoption because the disruption is just so enormous in healthcare over the last 3 years.
So if you open my email right now and you search the subject 5 minutes, you would find probably 4,000 emails over the last 15 years to CFOs saying, "You got 5 minutes?" For me escalating to a CFO, "Hey, I can't get this contract done. I can't get this NDA done. I can't get this data. I can't get this workshop scheduled." Because everything we do starts with us on our nickel doing an assessment at our risk, my team, my resources, my money, to show a health system CFO or COO, here's what's the art of the possible. So the power of working on my nickel is I can go to that CFO and say, hey, I'm working for free here. Can you get Jerry or Mary to get me what I need? That 4,000 emails is probably doubled in the 2 years I've been working on health systems because it is glacial. So just for example, I average 48 hours to get an NDA, mutual NDA completed with a $20 billion publicly traded company. Tractor Supply took 24 hours. Lululemon took 36 hours because it was a Friday. I'm averaging 3 months if I sign a health systems paper with no red lines. Think about that. Think about that. Their paper, no red lines. And everything falls off of that in terms of pace. I need to get data. I need to get workshops. Now there are amazing exceptions. And, when I think about my family donating money to health systems, I know exactly who I donate to because there's a bunch of unbelievable health system executives that are firing through this red tape. And I've got great examples of 24 hours and 36 hours. So I'm not talking about everybody, but I'd say in general, the pace has been shocking. And we have some health systems right now. I've got a couple, one that's probably $650,000 a month that we'd be saving. And I can't get to yes. We're waiting for red lines on a contract. Another one that's probably $1.3 million a month. So it's just slow.
Yeah. And time is money. Every one of those months that goes by, it's lost.
Yeah. And by the way, there's reason. It could be because they're wildly understaffed. Right. And they're trying to do this off the side of their desk. And at the end of the day, what's so rewarding about healthcare is when we get it done. Look, if I save corporate America, a bunch of money, it's great. It's rewarding. Everybody makes more money. It's wonderful. We save a health system money. They provide better care in their community and they don't have to cut costs by reducing people, which directly affects patient care. So it's very rewarding.
Now you're speaking my language.
Right. And they're wildly understaffed. So let us go get this done for you.
So, David, let's go through. The biggest reason for bringing you on was benchmarks. You've thrown out a bunch, but that speed to execution, that's definitely a huge concern. And, I think there are things that people could be doing to speed it up, but they're almost caught in that vicious cycle at this point. And until you start really making significant improvements to the bottom line and having the resources that you can commit to solving the problem. So you got to start somewhere. And I feel like these benchmarks really help guide people to how to prioritize making some improvements. And you've already said 74%, maybe on a conservative estimate is the opportunity here in non-clinical. You've seen a big movement, right? Like probably when you first got into healthcare, there weren't a lot of people focusing on this. Now, all of a sudden, I feel like it's the big movement, right? Indirect spend is the buzzword in healthcare now. So do you think the benchmarks that you kind of throw out to your healthcare customers, are they benchmarks to achieve? Or are they more like baseline benchmarks, like get here and so we can take you further?
Yeah, I think it's probably a combination of both. And benchmarks, so overarching comment, and this is another thing that my friend told me when we sat at that porch having that beer during COVID. He said, look, one of the things, and by the way, nobody in healthcare yet has argued with me when I said this, which I think is interesting. And I say it in almost every meeting. So I tell him the story about how my friend Brian told me this. He said, we know as healthcare executives we're inefficient, but we compare ourselves every year to other health systems. And when I say that, they all nod and say, yeah, your friend was right. And I'm talking about some household brand health systems and wonderful local health systems. And they all say, yeah, that's right. We know we're inefficient and we compare ourselves every year to an industry we know is inefficient. So taking that and saying, let's compare to how we're buying these things with different industries. And that's the other thing is that the partners they choose only focus on healthcare. So you want a partner that comes from outside healthcare to push and challenge you to think of it differently. So the kind of benchmarks we're able to provide is, we can go bananas on benchmarks. What are you paying for security guards? And what is corporate America paying for security guards? What are you paying for floor care? What are you paying for waste management? What are you paying for snow removal? I had a health system in a major metropolitan area head of supply chain, CFOs say to me, hey, does this pass the sniff test with you? My team's telling me there's only one landscaping company that can mow our lawns. This is a major metropolitan area. No, it doesn't pass the sniff test with me. That makes absolutely no sense. Somebody either doesn't feel like doing the work to source this out, or they're getting their lawn mowed for free or something, because there's no way that there's only one company that can do that. But we have a health system that we work with in another major metropolitan area that we looked at their cost of the food they serve. They were 47% higher than other urban health systems. Now, I grew up in Connecticut. Greenwich, Connecticut is known for one of the nicest maternity wards in the world. They're probably serving lobster thermidor, and we could probably figure out why they're 47% over other systems. It wasn't Greenwich, Connecticut. It was an urban hospital system that was 47% higher, and nobody wanted to double click on why. That's crazy. And that's the kind of stuff that we'll see. And the truth of the matter is probably a hell of a salesperson somewhere that sold a great deal to somebody who doesn't have the bandwidth to do this and needed to get it done and move on to the next thing. I don't think anybody's doing anything wrong. It's just focus. Then you think about your own life. I mean, I know what my mortgage rate is. I know what my insurance costs, but do I have any idea what I'm paying per gallon for oil heat? I have no idea. The bill comes and I pay it. And I think
it changes every month.
So David, I'm always looking I like your thought process of bringing people outside of healthcare industry, because we've done a lot in supply chain. Give us another look on how you run inventory management, and to kind of tie into that benchmarking scenario. I'm trying to tie together your comments of retail versus healthcare. Are there regulations and requirements that maybe a vendor uses proactively to separate themselves? You have to go this direction because of the regulatory requirements. Or are you finding from your years of experience that it really isn't that much of a difference? I'm just curious. I'd like you to speak to that if you don't mind.
Yeah, it really isn't much of a difference. And if I played a drinking game, I had to take a shot every time somebody told me healthcare is different. I'd be on the ground by 10 a.m. every single day. It isn't. It isn't. Yes, there are nuances to healthcare software, but it's still software. How you negotiate a software contract doesn't change if we're, making cars, making yoga pants, fixing knees. It doesn't change. And health, are there nuances to biohazard, waste management versus a restaurant waste management? Sure. But this isn't rocket science stuff. That's the med surg stuff, right? So that's the stuff you want to have. You want the clinical expertise, the physician preference stuff is where that's the secret sauce. And that's no different than the chief merchandising officers of our retailers. Performance fabric or whatever it may be. That's what you're good at. That's your secret sauce. You should own that. But buying the escalator maintenance, it's there's no secret sauce there.
All right, here's my last question before we wrap up. Big movement on trying to shift and support local communities, local business, etc. That's a category that has typically fallen outside of that GPO spend. So I'm assuming that those are the same services that you're looking at all the time and falling into that non-clinical indirect spend. I think one of the problems sometimes with that is it just increases the number of suppliers, right? So you're back to that resource dedication. How much time do people have to truly evaluate it? What's the reality that you see practically happening in all of these healthcare organizations when it comes to supporting local businesses? Are they generally doing a good job? Do they have a good process for it? Or, is this an area that, they're doing it because they know they need to do it, but they're not necessarily doing it well and protecting their bottom line?
I think they do a great job supporting local businesses. And let's be honest, those local businesses also donate to especially the non-for-profit systems. And you should get a best of market price. It doesn't matter if they're a local supplier, you still have to get a best of market price. And arguably, if they're in your community, you should get the best price. And it's funny, I'll take you out of healthcare. When we first worked with someone like Tractor Supply, one of their biggest concerns was we're in rural environments. So, you mentioned Gap Inc. and you mentioned Under Armour and you mentioned Lulu. They're in very well-established urban environments. How do you know that market will work in the middle of farm country? Right. And we first worked with WellSpan Health in York, Pennsylvania. How do you know in our more rural environment that will work? What we found is you should support those local suppliers and they should support you by giving you a best of market price. The other thing we found is with DEI initiatives and sustainability initiatives, again, if you only benchmark yourself against your own industry, you're limited in what suppliers you know about that can hit those goals. We're able to take that $100 billion of spend data and multiple industry learnings and push them to that health system client and say, hey, there's a supplier that retailers use you've never heard of. And there's a supplier that publishing companies use you've never heard of. And financial services organizations use that you never heard of that may help you hit your goals around sustainability and diversity, not just local. The other flip side of this is your local supplier you may be 80% of their revenue. That's dangerous. You can't have a supplier, even if it is a local supplier and you care about your local community so much, that is overly reliant on you. So with someone like us who has $100 billion of spend, we might be able to say, hey, let's get that local supplier more spend from outside this health system so they're a stable supplier and they're not over leveraged on this one client.
Yeah, because it's devastating.
To your point, if you only have one big client and something goes wrong, that's not good for the supplier, obviously. So
yeah, they can't. It happened with COVID. A lot of these suppliers, when elective surgeries and things were all canceled, a lot of people got hurt, and we can look at a supplier like that and say, look, I can give you spend from 5-6 other clients, and by the way, I need a better price on this health system because you're over market, but I'm going to give you a bigger book and a more stable book so that you can grow your business, and we try real hard to do that.
David, great job today.
Yeah. I learned a lot. And, to your point, David, obviously multiple industries look at supply chain drastically different, dramatically different. And, kind of to your point of your benchmarks, retail and those other industries to healthcare, I think healthcare could do better, but it's just interesting how you go about doing it. And so, well done. And I learned a lot. Thanks for coming on.
I appreciate it. If you guys know anybody that can start my car in case any GPOs are listening, let me know.
All right, everybody. David Pennino, founder and CEO at LogicSource, with us today, talking about non-clinical spend, some benchmarks, and maybe where to start helping improve your bottom line so you can reinvest those resources and continue to do great working in this category. David, thanks again.
Thank you all for your time.
Hey, what a great episode with David Pennino, founder and CEO at LogicSource, just talking about the non-clinical spend. We did talk, I think, a little while back with Mark Van Sumeren on his second appearance on this show about this area, but we didn't really get into benchmarks quite as much as we did today. And, David's got a great story there, obviously, and how he just kind of haphazardly fell into healthcare. But, for the most part, many of the people listening, to this show kind of fell into healthcare as well. Listen to all the people working on the front lines that we've spoken to. How did you get into healthcare? Well, I didn't really expect it, to work out this way. This is where I am, and I think that aspect around focusing on clinical supplies because the passion for delivering care to the patient makes a lot of sense, but we're scrapping for everything we can get these days.
Oh, absolutely. And he also, Justin, essentially said about 75% of the spend of a health system is on purchase services that's non-contracted. So huge kind of greenfield there for all systems to get involved in. So I learned a lot, did a great job, and I'm glad he came on today.
All right. Well, on behalf of Gary and myself, thank you to everyone listening to this episode of Power Supply.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Power Supply. As a reminder, you can help support us by subscribing on your favorite podcast app or by downloading the smartphone app on your iPhone or Android. Simply search for Power Supply in the App Store or Google Play. The best thing about downloading the smartphone app is that you can access bonus content for certain episodes. and view episodes in certain categories, like articles on the go and vendor spotlights. Are you following us on LinkedIn or Facebook yet? If you are and you love an episode or post, then let your social network know about it. Like, comment, or share our posts along with your thoughts and keep the conversation going. If you have any topics or guests that you would like to recommend for a future episode, just send us an email to info@powersupplymedia.net. We look forward to hearing from you.